All right. A very warm welcome to everyone joining this New England Rug Society webinar today. On behalf of Julia Bailey and myself, it is always a pleasure to host these webinars. And today we're particularly pleased and honored to have the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum as our co-sponsor. A few housekeeping things. For those of you who've joined our many webinars before, you know the drill. Questions can be typed into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any time. Those questions will be moderated by me at the end of our speaker's presentation. And important note, I will probably not get to every question. I do try to look for patterns and things that are asked more frequently. I will edit and combine and do my best to ask questions of our wonderful speaker, Margaret Squires. There will be no chat function for the audience. And again, questions must be typed in to Q&A. They will be answered or they will be posed to the speaker at the end of the presentation. Again, thank you to Lori Karchner of the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. And over to you, Lori, to say a few words.
Thank you, Jean. I'm very happy to be here today on behalf of the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. And thank you to our tremendous audience for being here. Located in the heart of Washington, D.C., the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum celebrates the creative achievements of local and global cultures from antiquity through today. The Textile Museum collection includes more than 21,000 examples of handmade textile art representing 5 continents and 5 millennia. The museum is also home to the Coats and Textile Traces Study Center and its global collection of over 4,000 textile fragments. The museum's exhibitions, education programs, and publications reach communities in the DC area and around the world, and connecting with textile enthusiasts is a critical part of our work. So we're thrilled to be able to partner with the New England Rug Society on virtual programs like this one. I encourage you, if you're able to visit the DC area, to come join us at the museum. Later this month, the museum opens its newest exhibition, Irresistible: The Global Patterns of ikat. This exhibition explores the global phenomenon of ikat textiles through more than 70 masterful examples from countries as diverse as Japan, Indonesia, India, Uzbekistan, Cote d'Ivoire, Guatemala, and many others. The first iteration of this exhibition was at the Seattle Art Museum last year, and it opens in Washington, D.C. on February 24th. Both exhibitions are accompanied by the catalog Global ikat: Roots and Routes of a Textile Technique, the David Paley collection. Lastly, if you're not already aware, the museum publishes new research every year through the Textile Museum Journal. You can learn more about the journal on the museum's website or send inquiries to us at tmjournal@gwu.edu. And access to the Textile Museum Journal is free for museum members. Today, I give my sincere thanks on behalf of the museum to our speaker, Margaret Squires, for presenting her fascinating research. It's a real pleasure to have you walk us through your discoveries today. And I'll hand the microphone now over to Julia Bailey to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Jean. And welcome everyone to the New England Rug Society's first webinar of 2024. Our speaker today, as you have learned, is Margaret Squires, who is now completing her PhD at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Margaret's dissertation focuses on the relationship between carpet design and architecture of the Iranian Safavid period. Today, Margaret's going to talk about a key example of that carpet to architecture relationship, namely a carpet of giant proportions that was made for the vast audience hall of the 17th century Chehel Sotun Palace in Isfahan. Piece by piece, however, that carpet eventually disappeared from the palace. Margaret will tell us of her detective work in tracing the carpet's history from its making to its dissemination and beyond, and in interpreting its fragmentary remains. So now, from wherever you are, please join me and Jean and Lori in welcoming our speaker, Margaret Squires. Over to you, Margaret.
Hello, everyone. Good evening from London. Thank you to Julia for the introduction. I'd also like to thank the New England Rug Society and the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum for inviting me to give this lecture. And finally, I would like to thank the audience. So grateful to you all for being here and for your interest in my research, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you this evening. So this talk is based on a chapter of my dissertation. My dissertation focuses on the Safavid period in Iran, which is 1502 to 1722, and is really considered to be a golden age in the weaving of carpets. My work aims to give context to Safavid carpets by considering their relationship to architecture. Now, a few things that I'm not really doing in this research are some of the more traditional ways of assessing carpets. So what I'm not doing is categorization and chronology. I'm not really making a lot of attributions here. I'm also not particularly interested in, for this project, stylistic analysis and symbolism of carpets. What I am interested in is how people encountered and experienced carpets in Iran. And this is why I'm looking at carpets in the context of architecture, to try to envision what it was like to be in Safavid buildings when the carpets were there. Now, there are a few major problems with this approach. One is that there are actually no Safavid carpets still in situ in a Safavid building today. There are many Safavid carpets surviving. Most of them are in museum or private collections, but the vast majority don't have clear provenances that trace them back to Safavid Iran. So how are we going to get at this kind of experiential information that I'm talking about? Well, fortunately, there are a few important exceptions to these problems. The first are carpets that remained in their original contexts long enough to be well documented. So these are typically carpets that remained on the floor of palaces or shrines from the Safavid period until the late 19th century. Another way to get at this kind of experiential information is through textual sources written in the Safavid period that mention carpets in buildings. Through these sources, we can connect buildings to types of carpets, but it's usually not going to be specific enough to connect one specific carpet that survives to a building. The carpet that I'm going to be speaking about today falls into the first category. This carpet remained in its original location until the late 19th century. That location was a palace called the Chehel Sotun. Chehel Sotun in Persian means 40 columns, and that's a reference to this colonnaded porch on the front of the building. The palace is located in Isfahan, which was made the capital of Iran under Shah Abbas I in the year 1598. This palace wasn't part of that initial construction project, but it was added to the palace complex by Shah Abbas II in 1647. I'll come back to this building later in more detail, but I wanted you to know what I was referring to when I call this carpet the Chehel Sotun carpet. As I mentioned, my research deals with experience, what it's like to be in the presence of the carpets, and what it was like to be in Safavid buildings with the carpets. In this talk, I'm going to go over 3 centuries of different people's experiences with the carpet, from Safavid princes to Isfahani residents, European travelers, and museum curators in the 20th century. I hope you'll indulge me by letting me start with my own experience with the carpet. Every carpet scholar knows how important it is to see carpets in person. The challenge with this carpet is that it's broken up into at least 13 fragments, which are spread all over the world. When I embarked on this research project, I decided to go and see one of the fragments, which is housed in the Museum of Applied Art in Frankfurt, Germany. I had seen this image that you can see on the left on the slide and thought, this isn't really going to be a big deal to get this fragment out. Looking at the pattern, kind of going off of the other carpets that I'd seen from this period, I figured this is just a small piece. After all, it's only one of 13 fragments. This isn't a huge ask for me to see this fragment. So I wrote to the museum and asked if they would get it out of storage for me. I had also written down the dimensions, but, just didn't really process it. At this point, I also hadn't been to the Chehel Sotun, so couldn't really fully grasp the scale. It turned out it's huge. They had to close off an entire gallery and push together 6 tables to show this tiny piece of the carpet. What I had thought was a small request turned out to be a pretty big one, and I'm so grateful I was allowed the time and space to see this. So why am I telling you about this? Well, I realized that this experience that I had actually captured something essential about the carpet. Many other people before me had seen the carpet or fragments of it and experienced the same kind of cognitive dissonance. When the carpet was whole, it must have been overwhelming to look at it. I think standing in the center of this carpet in the 17th century would have made you feel like a miniature person. Now, unfortunately, no one wrote about this carpet during the Safavid period, at least that I know of. So we don't have a firsthand account of what it was like to see this carpet when it was first made. The historical record picks up in the early 19th century, when it becomes an object, or later objects, of fascination and a collectible for a growing number of carpet enthusiasts in the West. A consistent theme throughout these textual sources that mention the carpet in the 19th century is its genre-defying scale. It takes on the title of the largest carpet ever made, and even gains an apocryphal origin story about being carried from India to Iran on the backs of 2 elephants. Like the carpet itself, evidence around it is fragmentary and challenging to put together. In this talk, I'll be doing some careful stitching and patching to reconstruct its history, and ultimately a few sections will remain incomplete. The reward of these efforts will be being able to envision the carpet unfurled in its original palatial setting. This picture will have broader implications for carpet history, and really tells us a lot about changing ways of thinking about, using, and making carpets in Safavid Iran. To help guide you through this complicated puzzle, I wanted to lay out some of my main research questions. Each of these questions addresses a different moment in the carpet's history. The first question is, how do we know that these fragments belong to a carpet woven for the Chehel Sotun in the Safavid period? This question deals with the dismantling and dispersal of the carpet in the late 19th and early 20th century. And to answer it, I'll rely on the written accounts of European and Iranian observers. The second question is, How was it possible to make a carpet large enough to fill the 9 by 18 meter audience hall of the Chehel Sotun Palace? This question deals with the moment of commission and production, so in the Safavid period. And I'll be answering it through technical analysis of the fragments. Question 3 is, what was it like to be in the Chehel Sotun in its original carpeted state? This question deals with the years between the manufacture of the carpet and the fall of the Safavid dynasty in 1722, when the palace fell into disuse. And to answer it, I'll be looking at historical sources from the period and also a digital reconstruction of the carpet in the palace. Before we dive into these questions, I want to give you a sense of the carpet as it exists today. The carpet survives in at least 13 fragments, though I suspect there are probably more out there that will come to light at some point. And if you have one, I hope you'll email me and tell me about it. I made the digital model on the right, which I'll discuss more later, but include it here to just give you a sense of how much of the carpet survives. I'm not sure how exactly these fragments fit into the carpet pattern overall, but this just shows kind of how much of the carpet is left. And you can see that the fragments only make up about 1/4 to 1/3 of what the complete carpet once was. The carpet's design is a lattice pattern, which is closely related to North Indian carpets from the mid-17th century, probably around the same time that this was made. The example here on the left is in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. It has a similar pattern to the Chehel Sotun carpet, but it's much more finely woven and woven using pashmina, whereas the Chehel Sotun carpet is wool. The original color palette of the Chehel Sotun carpet was also probably similar to this Mughal carpet on the left. It would have had a rich red field and this dark blue-green border. The differences between the two are probably explained by different places of production. Stephen Cohen and Yumiko Kamada place the Chehel Sotun carpet into the broader corpus of carpets made in the Deccan. So you can see in this map on the left that the Deccan is a region of central India, which was south of the Mughal Empire and remained independent from the Mughals until the late 17th century. Cohen and Kamada's work identifies particular technical and stylistic characteristics of Deccani carpets, which are beyond the scope of this lecture. I hope you'll look at their work if you're more interested in learning about the distinctions between Mughal and Deccani carpets. But suffice it to say that the fragment I've studied aligns with the technical features ascribed by Cohen and Kamada. Okay, moving on to question 1. How do we know that these fragments belong to a carpet woven for the Chehel Sotun in the Safavid period? Visitors to Isfahan in the 19th century saw a dilapidated carpet in the Chehel Sotun's audience hall. James Morier, an English diplomat and novelist who visited Iran from 1808 to 1809, noted in his travel journal, quote, "The furniture of the Chehel Sotun, which consists indeed of carpets only, is still kept there. The carpets of the time of Abbas are of a regular pattern, are of a large pattern, more regular and infinitely superior in texture to those of the present day. Although the outer part of the fabric is suffered to fall to ruin, the interior is still preserved in repair, as it forms the divan-e-khane, or hall of audience to the palace, and is therefore kept in readiness for the king's reception." End quote. Morier specifies that the carpet has a large pattern and dates it to the time of Abbas. This is almost certainly our carpet. When he says the time of Abbas, he's referring to Shah Abbas I, which corresponds to an incorrect dating of the palace. Susan Babai, in her landmark study of Isfahan's palaces, has since corrected the dating of this palace to the 1640s. Regardless of Maurier's exact accuracy, this descriptor from the time of Abbas does confirm that the carpet was already very old when he saw it in 1808. By the 1880s, pieces of the carpet began to disappear from the Chehel Sotun, destined for the market. Jabari Ansari, an Iranian historian, was a first-hand observer of this carpet's dismantling and dispersal. He wrote in his book, The History of Isfahan and Ray, quote, "I remember from childhood that in the audience hall of the Chehel Sotun, there was a carpet woven in one two-sided piece, every inch of which was purchased at an exorbitant price. As a result of carelessness between 1298 and 1305, which I'll just note is a Hijri date corresponding to 1880 to 1888 CE, it disappeared piece by piece behind the Chehel Sotun," end quote. We also have the collectors' and connoisseurs' perspectives recorded from around this time. In the late 19th century, the carpet attracted attention and gained fame as the largest carpet ever made. Growing knowledge about carpet history also allowed for its attribution to India. Frederick Robert Martin wrote about this carpet in 1903 in his book, A History of Oriental Carpets Before 1800. He says, quote, "The very largest carpet that in all probability was ever made in the East, and of which some portions still exist, was still to be found lying in the place for which it was made, in Chehel Sotun at Isfahan. Numerous fragments of it have, of late years, appeared in the bazaars of Constantinople. The technique denotes that the carpet is Indian, being assuredly from the imperial manufactories at Lahore. This opinion is also strengthened by the tradition that it was transported from India to Isfahan on the backs of 2 elephants." End quote. This perspective really encapsulates the myth-making around the carpet that was perpetuated by later commentators. I wanted to illustrate Martin's idea that the carpet was transported from India to Isfahan on the backs of 2 elephants. And I thought, finally, here is my chance to use generative AI in my research. Apparently, DALL-E 2 was just as confused as I was about how exactly this would work. Martin saw only fragments, but confidently declares it to be the largest carpet ever made in the East. He continues, quote, "Unfortunately, all the fragments I have seen of this carpet have been in so bad a condition that it was impossible to photograph them. The price demanded being so high that I could not purchase them for the purpose of having a colored drawing made in Vienna, as I could find no artist in Constantinople who could do such a work." The prices Martin complains about are reflective of a broader trend for collecting fragments. In the early 20th century, the prices of complete Safavid carpets had reached such astronomical heights that there emerged a secondary market for fragments. This incentivized the dismantling of carpets like the Chehel Sotun carpet. Sometimes, as in the case of the archival carpets, for example, the fragments were pieced back together. But in this case, that didn't happen, probably because it was already in such bad condition. To summarize this section, these sources confirm that the fragments surviving today were indeed part of a carpet lining the Chehel Sotun at least as early as 1808. Still, this leaves us with a 160-year gap between the first written mention of the carpet in 1808 and the construction of the Chehel Sotun in 1647. So how can I be so sure that this carpet wasn't made later in the 18th century? The reason is that it doesn't make sense historically to weave a carpet for this palace after 1722. In 1722, Isfahan fell to the Afghan invasion, and its once magnificent palaces fell into disuse. Attention was again paid to the Chehel Sotun in the 19th century when the Qajars added new paintings to it. But this is too late for the carpet to have been made, based on Morier's observation in 1808 that the carpet he saw there was already very old. This tells me that the carpet must have been made either in the late 17th or very early in the 18th century before the fall of the Safavid dynasty. Now that that's settled, we'll move on to the second question. How is it possible to make a carpet large enough to fill the 9 by 18 meter audience hall of the Chehel Sotun Palace? If the Chehel Sotun carpet covered the entire floor of the audience hall, it would have been 9 by 18 meters. This poses an immediate problem. The largest carpets made in Iran and India don't exceed about 4.8 meters in width. For reference, the well-known archival carpet measures 10.5 by 5.3 meters, which is about 1/3 the size of the Chehel Sotun carpet. Some of the largest carpets made in this period are the Durbar carpets produced in India. This one, pictured here, is almost as long as the Chehel Sotun carpet. And just so that it's clear, in the photograph, this carpet is draped, so it's folded in half. But this carpet is not nearly as wide as the Chehel Sotun carpet would have been. It's only about half the projected width. To better understand how the Chehel Sotun carpet was made, we need a visual approximation of the complete carpet. A visual model of the carpet already existed before I started this research. In 1922, Kendrick and Tattersall's publication of the carpet included this illustration, which shows about 1/4 of the carpet's pattern. This has been subsequently republished elsewhere. So why did I feel the need to make a new one? Well, when I compared this model to the surviving fragments, I noted a few problems with it. For one, it has slightly inaccurate proportions in the central field. It also has very stretched out side borders. The other problem is that the corners are really just made up here. So whoever drew this just filled in the corner, didn't know what the real corner resolution was. To make my model, I used digital drawing tools to trace the patterns on the surviving fragments of the Chehel Sotun carpet. You can see some screenshots that I took from this process. So once I had done that, I then used these little pieces of the pattern to kind of repeat and turn these motifs around in the central field and the borders to extrapolate the pattern of the entire carpet. Here's a comparison between the old model and the model that I made. You can see how the proportions have changed, particularly in the vertical borders. I decided to leave the corners incomplete, even though there is a fragment of one of the corners in Cincinnati, but that fragment has been heavily patched and repaired, and so I didn't want to rely on it to extrapolate all 4 corners. It's important to note that the symmetrical perfection of this model doesn't correspond to the real carpet. The real carpet would have had a much more organic appearance than this. And looking at the fragments, you can very clearly see that they have a lot of variations and idiosyncrasies. But this just gives us a good idea of what the overall pattern looked like. Having a good model was also essential for understanding the Frankfurt fragment. a few more images of which you can see here. When I matched up the Frankfurt fragment to the pattern, as you can see here, so figuring out where exactly it fit in the overall pattern of the carpet, I realized that it's a transverse section that ran parallel to the short end borders. Knowing this, something didn't quite add up when I analyzed this fragment. Its weave direction is counterintuitive. On most carpets, the warp direction is the longer dimension. You can see this picture of a loom showing you what I'm explaining here. So the warp direction is usually the longer vertical dimension. And the weft direction is normally the horizontal dimension. The weft direction is normally shorter because it's restricted by the width of the loom, whereas the warps can be rolled up. On the Frankfurt fragment, the warp direction is going, as you can see, indicated by this arrow, which when we look at it in the context of the entire carpet, means that the longer dimension of this carpet was the weft direction. So this is the opposite of what we saw on the last slide. So what does this mean? This means that if the carpet was woven in one piece, the loom would have had to be over 18 meters wide. Since I am speaking to the New England Rug Society, imagine a loom that stretched approximately the distance between the pitcher's mound and home plate at Fenway Park. Based on all the surviving evidence, such a loom did not exist in the 17th century. Instead, the Frankfurt fragment suggests that the carpet was woven and assembled in a modular fashion. We do have other examples from both India and Iran that support this theory. The carpet on the right is the carpet woven for the tomb of Shah Abbas II in the 1670s. It consists of two pieces that have these, what I call full bleed edges. And together they form this large 12-sided carpet designed to fit around a cenotaph. So in this case, the carpet that they wanted to make to fill a specific architectural space was too wide for the technical restrictions of the loom, and instead they made it in these two modular pieces that, when placed together, look like one large carpet. There are also modular carpets woven in Mughal India around this time. The carpet on the left is one of the well-known shaped carpets. An important distinction here is that the Mughal carpet on the left does actually have a narrow border going all the way around, so it doesn't have this kind of full bleed edge that the Iranian carpet on the right has. I think that the Chehel Sotun carpet had this kind of full bleed edge, like this carpet from the tomb of Shah Abbas II. A modular construction would also partly explain why the Chehel Sotun carpet ended up in so many pieces. Some of the fragments were never connected to each other to begin with. This move toward modularity in carpets represents a shift in ways of thinking about what a carpet is. Prior to the period of Shah Abbas I, Iranian carpets followed strict design rules which had evolved naturally from the mechanics of carpet weaving. The rectangular shape of the loom and the strict horizontal and vertical structure of the weave dictated the rectangular shape of the carpet, from which evolved designs with borders enclosing a central field. This visual paradigm became so consistent that it came to define the carpet as both object and medium. This notion is challenged by modular carpets like the one woven for the Chehel Sotun. Is it one carpet or many? With this and other modular examples, the visual paradigm of a carpet is separated from the mechanical process from which it derives. This profound shift in thinking about carpets demonstrates that the most important innovations in carpet weaving in the latter half of the Safavid period came about through dialogue with architecture. A quick review of what we've covered so far. In the first part of the lecture, we established that the 13 fragments now in museums and private collections belong to a massive carpet woven for the Chehel Sotun in the late Safavid period. The second part told us that the carpet was produced in the Deccan in modular pieces, which were laid side by side to create the illusion of one massive carpet. Now we can move on to the final question. What was it like to be in the Chehel Sotun in its original carpeted state? To tell you a little bit more about the Chehel Sotun, it's part of a larger royal precinct in Isfahan called the Dawlat Khane. This palace is set within a lush garden, and there's this beautiful vista leading up to it with a large rectangular pool of water. Construction of the palace was completed in 1647 during the reign of Shah Abbas II. For over 75 years, this palace served as a ceremonial stage designed to visually represent the Safavid axis of power. It was the site of feasts and ceremonies, including the second coronation of Shah Suleiman in 1668. Susan Babai's analysis, which I mentioned earlier, of the palace demonstrates its spatial choreography and optical effects. In her analysis, she describes how each successive space focuses in. So you first enter the building through this tall open porch called the talar in Persian, which you can see in this image here. This space has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor level of the front part of the building. From there, you proceed to a smaller space called the pseudo-talar, which is enclosed on 3 sides. So you can see that in the center here. In that space, the floor gets higher and the ceiling gets lower. So there's this kind of zooming in effect. The focal point is the mirrored throne avon. That's this pointed niche, which is covered in this beautiful mirror decoration. At the back of the throne avon is a small door, which opens up into the large audience hall. So from this gradual zooming in, you enter into this audience hall, which bursts forth in dazzling gold and jewel tones. The room is topped by 3 magnificent domes, which are all covered in this beautiful illumination in gold and brilliant colors, which is all floral and vegetal designs. On the walls are large-scale figural paintings. You can see 2 of them here. And they depict scenes which revolve around Safavid relations with the Mughals and the Uzbeks. This is the room for which our carpet was made. When you visit it today, there's a mismatch between the richly embellished surfaces of the walls and the blank floors. The deep red, green, and gold hues of the carpet, as well as its design, would have complemented the wall and ceiling direction when it was originally in the space. The massive scale of this carpet also enhanced the optical effects of the architecture. This digital reconstruction, which is actually a still of an interactive 3-dimensional model of the palace with the carpet, gives you an idea of what the carpet would have looked like in the space, at least in terms of its proportions relative to the architecture. So the staggering effect that I was describing earlier of going through these successively narrower spaces and then entering this grand audience hall would have been enhanced by the massive carpet. The carpet gave the room a sense of superhuman scale. And visitors to the palace would have felt diminutive, facing a familiar design format at an unfamiliar magnitude. Remember that cognitive dissonance that I talked about at the beginning of the lecture. The carpet also had a practical purpose in the palace. It had an acoustic effect along with the stucco decoration on the walls. It would have muffled the noise generated by hundreds of attendants, grandees, musicians, dancers, and the staging of metal and ceramic serving vessels. Jean Chardin, a visitor to the Safavid court in the 17th century, described his experience on such an occasion at the Chehel Sotun. He says, quote, "One does not notice there the slightest confusion, nor the slightest noise. One does not hear people stirring there. The one attends on one side, and the other attends on the other. This good order comes, as I think, from three things which are particular to Orientals. The first, that those who serve are barefoot and walk on carpets, which prevents noise." End quote. The carpet contributed to a sense of innate order and perfection that was actually achieved through the meticulous choreography that characterized Safavid ceremonies and feasts. My final point will deal with the nature of the commission. As I mentioned at the beginning, this process of patching together the history of this carpet would leave some sections incomplete. And we've arrived at this incomplete section. Because the nature of this commission remains, for me, an object of speculation. The big question here is, why wouldn't they have commissioned Iranian weavers to make a carpet for the Chehel Sotun? Iranian weavers at this time were making bespoke carpets for other important buildings, such as the carpet woven for the tomb of Shah Abbas II that I showed earlier. So why look to the Deccan as a source for this palace's carpet? One explanation is that it was out of practical necessity. It may have been easier to weave a carpet of this size in the Deccan, which seems to have been known for weaving very large carpets. Another thing to consider is that this took place at an important moment in Safavid-Deccani relations. At this time, there was an ongoing conflict between the Safavids and the Mughals over control of Kandahar, a region of modern-day Afghanistan, which was an important overland trade corridor. The Deccani sultanates maintained independence from the Mughals until 1687, and were natural allies of the Safavids on the Indian subcontinent. There was extensive artistic exchange between Safavid Iran and the Persian-speaking Deccani courts, which included carpets going both ways. In fact, an important group of Safavid carpets was kept in a palace in Bijapur, which was contemporary with the Chehel Sotun. So, whatever the specific circumstance of this carpet's production, whether it was a commission or some kind of diplomatic gift, we should think about this carpet in this context. From a few scraps of well-worn carpet, we can patch together what was previously a 9 by 18 meter blank space in the history of the Chehel Sotun. Envisioned as a complete carpet, these fragments constitute an integral layer of the building's conception and design. The disorientation I experienced on encountering a piece of this carpet for the first time attests to the continued effectiveness of its optical conceit, intended to distort the viewer's sense of space and emphasize the grand scale of the Chehel Sotun's audience hall, in concert with the painted and gilded stucco illumination framing the monumental wall paintings above. This carpet's unique construction, revealed through close technical analysis of the fragments, also speaks to the transformative effects of such bespoke commissions for architecture on ways of making and thinking about carpets in the Safavid period. The ambitions of those overseeing the Chehel Sotun's construction and design pushed the boundaries of the medium, accelerating the breakdown of long-held ideas about the completeness of a carpet being restricted to the technical limitations of the loom. These developments, achieved between the architect and the weaver in 17th century Iran, ought to be considered a revolution in carpet design of equal importance to the cross-pollination of the arts of the book and the making of carpets in the previous century. Thank you, and I welcome your questions in the Q&A or over email.
So much, Margaret. That was fascinating. Very interesting to listen to and generates many, many questions. So let's dig right in. And I did notice some other illustrious rug scholars among our audience, and they may have questions for you of a more complex scholarly tone that they may email to you. I note that your email is here on your last slide. So some of our audience members are intrigued by the idea of this giant carpet being transported on elephants from India to Iran. Do you know if transporting carpets by elephant was common?
I don't think so. I think that's complete Orientalist fantasy. I think it's much more likely that things that were being transported from the Deccan to Iran would have gone over a maritime route, especially given this conflict that I mentioned that was going on in the region between the Mughal Empire and the Safavids. I think this would have had to go via a maritime route.
And perhaps really going outside of scholarship, but do you have any sense of how the carpet in pieces would have been transported on the elephants? Do you think it was rolled up in sealed bundles? Any idea about that?
Well, I showed the generative AI images. I think
Yes, but
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. The carpet was just like on top of their head or like spread between the two of them. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. I believe you said, but could you confirm that you have seen all 13 of the fragments or no? How many
No.
have you actually examined?
The Frankfurt fragment that I showed is the only one that I've done a close technical study of. Yeah, seeing all 13 would be fantastic. Unfortunately, there are actually 3 in the Victoria and Albert Museum here in London. But as anyone who's tried to do any research at the V&A in the last several years knows, their collections and storage have been inaccessible for the entire time I've been working on my PhD. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to examine those, but I hope I will be able to in the future.
Kudos to Holly magazine, which got a bunch of us into the storehouse, I think, before they were shut down, back when Holly celebrated in 2019. What digital tools do you use for reconstructing this carpet?
So I used a variety of digital tools. I'm really interested in digital methods for art history. So to create the model of the carpet, I started in a program called Procreate. So I actually just used my iPad and the pencil on the iPad to trace the carpet. That's a useful tool because you can have different layers of images. So you're able to put the photograph of the fragments in one layer and then trace over it on another layer and then remove the image of the carpet. And then I also used Procreate to kind of repeat and can reconstruct the actual pattern from those tracings that I had. And then to make that model that I showed the still of that showed the carpet in the building, I used a program called Blender, which is a program for three-dimensional modeling. Yeah, they had an amazing course at the Courtauld, a workshop that I did a couple of years ago about 3D modeling of architecture. And that's where I learned how to do that. But honestly, if I tried to do it again, I probably wouldn't remember how, because that one's really complicated. But yeah.
Indeed it does. And can you tell us anything more about how the different sections of the carpet may have been connected? I think you said some of them maybe weren't connected. Can you tell us a bit more about that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that doing the world tour to see all of the fragments would be really useful for answering that question. I've also wondered if there would be a way through technical study to determine the size of each of the modular pieces. On the Frankfurt fragment, actually, you can kind of see it here in this image. I thought there might be a kind of thin selvage along the bottom of this fragment, which possibly could have shown where the edge of one of the pieces was. Like, this could be one modular section, although it's been shortened. But I'm not 100% sure on that. And I think based on the other examples that I've seen, so there's the carpet from the tomb of Shah Abbas II, and then there's actually another carpet woven for a different shrine. Those pieces don't seem like they were actually stitched together, but I think they were just laid side by side. But again, it's really hard to determine that. It would be nice if we could get all of the pieces and put them in one place and like try to really work it out. But that will probably never happen.
Can you explain what you mean by a full bleed edge, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that term actually comes from publishing, which a full bleed, when you're talking about book printing, is when the image goes all the way to the edge of the page, so you don't have a little gap or margin. And so what I mean when I say that about carpets is that there's no border, that the design kind of like bleeds over from one of the pieces to the other piece, so that when you put them next to each other, it would look like one continuous pattern.
Could you give us the actual dimensions of the floor in the Chehel Sotun, please?
Yeah, it's 9 by 18 meters. That's where the carpet dimensions come from.
So it's pretty much exactly the dimensions of the carpet.
Well, the projected dimensions of the carpet are based on the size of the audience hall.
Thank you for clarifying that. And just a little explanation about warps and wefts, and you had some wonderful illustrations, including of the New England field there. With a carpet this large, made in sections, the warps and wefts still ran consistently in the warps in the sort of up and down direction and the wefts across. Is that correct? That was a consistent weave as carpets are.
Yes, definitely. The warps are always going up and down on the loom, and the wefts are always going side to side.
Thank you. Here's a question about what the hall looked like and was decorated like. Are the current colors and murals in the reception hall of the palace the same, as far as you know, as when the carpet was in place in the 17th century?
Yes, I mean, I think they have been treated and conserved, but as far as we know, that is quite close to the original colors and design.
And you certainly touched on this with the silence What actually took place in that room, in that hall?
Yeah, so there would have been feasts and audiences, and like I mentioned, there was this second coronation of Shah Suleiman. So the quote that I read from Jean Chardin, who was a French traveler, was describing that event. But this would have been where they would have audiences with foreign ambassadors and big kind of royal ceremonies like the coronation or feasts and various things like that.
Do you have any speculation on where in the hall the Shah's thrones would have been?
So there was a throne. It wouldn't have, not in the hall, but that Avon that I talked about, that mirrored niche, is one place where a throne would have been. In that case, they would have been holding an event like in that kind of outdoor section. But in the audience hall, I'm not really sure. There are the paintings that show feasts and celebrations that are like depicted in the room. And in those, you see the Shah like actually just seated on a carpet with all of these other figures. So could have been a few different arrangements.
Were any of the designs in the carpet reflected in the paintings on the walls or vice versa?
One of the paintings on the wall, I guess I could go back to that slide. Oh, I don't have it here, unfortunately, but one of the paintings does show a lattice design carpet. It's not super, super close to this one, but it does kind of look like a Mughal carpet, possibly.
You did speak to some of the theories as to why this carpet was made in the Deccan and not in Isfahan. And of course, not the subject of your talk today, but could you just briefly allude to the richness of carpet making in Isfahan and the area there?
In Isfahan, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other lecture, I think. But yeah, lots of different types of carpets being made in Safavid Iran at this time. In wool and silk, some with metal wrapped thread, really just too many to cover here.
Indeed. And some technical questions about that great big fragment that you did examine. What are its approximate dimensions, and do you know what its weight was? And might you further have calculated what the weight of the entire carpet might have been?
I can't remember the dimensions off the top of my head. I could find it, but yeah, hopefully you can get a sense from the 6 tables that it was quite large. And I don't usually weigh things as part of my technical analysis, but that would be really interesting to try to figure out how much the entire thing weighed. Then that would probably help us definitively disprove the elephant theory.
Yes, it would help us think about the elephants.
So next time I'll definitely do that. But I imagine too, it weighs less. You can see from this image how badly uprated the pile is.
Yes.
So probably what it weighs now is significantly less than it did originally with the full pile surviving.
Here's a question which people who are interested in carpets often think about: how many of some type of old carpet were there? There are very few left of quite a number of carpets, and were there more? Applying that overall question to this carpet, do you have any speculation as to how many modular carpets might have been made? How unique do you think this one was?
There are others that I know of. At least 3 others that were made in Iran. Again, this kind of venture into looking at Indian carpets was sort of an unintentional move for me because, like I said, my dissertation is all about Safavid carpets. And it just so happened that this palace was carpeted with an Indian carpet. So I know more about carpet production in Iran than I do about the Indian production. But I found at least 3 modular carpets woven all in the 17th century. And I have a feeling that there were actually a lot more. And I think these carpets were made to fit into specific spaces and probably didn't end up in Western collections as frequently because they would have been very large and very specific to a building like a shrine or something. And so I think we probably just aren't aware of these for various reasons, like including the fact that they stayed in Iran or they were maybe broken up into fragments and we can't really tell at this point. But this is something I'm really interested in and have worked on in my dissertation and other areas.
Indeed, and I'm sure you would want members of the audience who know of other such carpets to contact you directly. Indeed, one of the audience members suggests that you might want to look into the massive carpet in the Sheikh Zayed Mosque that one of our audience members thinks was woven in sections in Iran and then assembled in Abu Dhabi.
Oh, yeah.
Are
Definitely.
you familiar with that one?
Yes, I think I've seen that one. Of course, when we get to modern production, like all of these things I'm saying about the restricted loom width are out the window, because the technical capabilities are much greater now in terms of size of hand-woven carpets. Yeah.
And of these modular sections, a wonderfully modern name for this very, very old carpet. Were there any traces of selvage on any of the fragments that, from what you've been able to see?
Yeah, like I was saying, when I looked at this one in person, I thought maybe that's what I was seeing, but it's really difficult because you can see this image is actually perfect on the last slide that it's been like rebound. And a lot of these, I mean, from looking at images of all the other fragments, I think this would also be like another way to study them is looking at like the modifications to them as they entered different collections because they were all spread out to different places so quickly that they've been treated in very different ways. So like this one in Frankfurt had these bindings added to the edges so that you're not actually seeing the original edge here. But and a lot of them, the edges are kind of jagged and like definitely not the original edge of a modular piece. But again, maybe if I do the world tour, then I'll find one that has a really good selvage. And that would help this argument.
Clearly, wonderful travels and fascinating studies await you. This has been such a fascinating webinar. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you one final question from the audience, which is, how did you get interested in this carpet and this topic for your thesis?
Well, that could be a very long answer, but how I got interested in this carpet was, again, because I was looking for examples of buildings which we know a specific carpet or type of carpet went in them, Safavid buildings. And so this was an example that others had already identified. There was this Chehel Sotun carpet, and I wanted to really like get into that history, and that's how I ended up looking at this carpet in particular. How I got interested in this topic more broadly is probably a longer answer. But yeah, I did my master's with Walter Denny, who I'm sure your audiences know very well. And he was really the person that introduced me to carpet studies. And then after I finished my master's, I went and worked at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston for 2 years with Aimé Froome, and had the extraordinary privilege to work with an amazing collection of Persian art, a lot of Safavid masterpieces, including carpets in the Hussein Afshar collection, which is on long-term loan there. And so I really fell in love with Safavid carpets through that, and decided that I wanted to do a PhD about Safavid carpets. And then I came to the Courtauld and started working with Susan Babai, whose book I mentioned a couple of times in my talk, very influential to me. And she is really the expert on Safavid architecture. And so through working with her, I got into this direction of thinking about carpets and architecture. Yeah, I could go back even further than that, but I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much on behalf of our audience and Julia Bailey and myself, the New England Rug Society. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure hosting you today. And also thank you to the George Washington University and the Textile Museum. For anyone who wants to watch this webinar again and really dig in, the recordings are an exclusive benefit for members of the New England Rug Society, and everyone is welcome to join. You can find the New England Rug Society on the internet and join and have access to the library of all of our webinar recordings, including 2 by Walter Denny. So thank you again. It's been a great pleasure, and a good day to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret.